I would rank Michigan ahead of number one Georgia. In fact, while I'm at it, I might rank Ohio State and Penn State above Georgia as well. Call your Georgia friends. Locked on Big Ten starts right now.
You are Locked on Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Big Ten. I'm Craig Sheeman. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. Thank you. We appreciate it so much. And, of course, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. It's brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Wolverines, best team in the country, bar none. We'll discuss. Plus, had some thoughts about the new Big Ten schedule that was released last week. Some quirks in there. I'll share those with you as well. And our Tuesday tweets. Maybe you made the cut this week. Be sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Big Ten for free wherever you get your podcast. That black subscribe button, please click it. It helps us out so much. That way you'll get the latest episode of this podcast as soon as it becomes available each and every day. So for those of you that have been with me since I took over Locked On Big Ten in late June, some of you may remember my very first podcast where I talked about being a lifelong Big Ten fan. You remember how I grew up in Michigan and went to school in Indiana at Indiana University. I even had a cup of coffee as a play-by-play announcer for the Big Ten Network doing college basketball games. It was wonderful. Growing up in the Midwest, when the holidays were over with, you just had cold, dreary winter days to look forward to. And that's why I love watching the Rose Bowl so much. It was just so beautiful, full of color, and of course had a Big Ten team in it every year. Whoever was in it for the Big Ten, I rooted for every single year. Always rooted for them. I'm Big Ten through and through. I've also told you a story on this podcast about a time when I was attending a BCS championship game as a member of the media. It was at the Louisiana Superdome in 2008. You may remember it. It was when Ohio State took on LSU, and LSU won 38-24. In fact, current Buckeyes offensive coordinator Brian Hartline was a wide receiver on the Buckeyes team back then. Just a little fun fact. But that game was just about over, and it was very obvious that LSU was going to win it. The game was in Louisiana. Lots of Louisiana people in the crowd, even though Buckeye fans traveled very well for that game. And I've always remembered how when I was walking around on the sidelines when the game was out of hand, that the crowd wasn't chanting LSU, LSU. They were chanting SEC, SEC. And I've never forgotten that. And they never wanted either Buckeye fans or a national television audience to forget it either, that the SEC was way better than the Big Ten or anybody else for that matter. Never forgot that. And I absolutely believe that Big Ten fans are just as passionate. I really do. Now, I know that the Big Ten has had a couple of hiccups in the postseason in football lately, but that doesn't matter. The Big Ten is absolutely the cream of the crop of college football, and it's only going to get bigger and better. 3 of the top 6 teams are Big Ten teams. 6 of the top 10 are current or future soon-to-be Big Ten teams as well. Once those USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon, they come next year, full of teams that are just ranked right through the top 10. So let's be clear about this. Let's talk about what's going on right now, though. After Texas's loss in the Red River rivalry this weekend against Oklahoma, they fall out of the top 3. And what that really did, with big impressive wins by Georgia over Kentucky and, of course, Michigan over Minnesota, that really ensconced those two, Georgia and Michigan, in the top 2. It's kind of like the old BCS days where we try to get the top 2 teams to pick a national championship out of those. But the question is, should Michigan actually be ranked number 1 instead of Georgia? I think they should be. And frankly, I could make a case for Ohio State and maybe even Penn State should be ranked higher than the Georgia Bulldogs. Yeah, that's right, Bulldog fan. I said it. So we'll discuss. Let's start off with Michigan and, of course, the Wolverines and Jim Harbaugh and his football team. That they are almost a perfect football team. Now, both fan bases from Michigan and maybe Georgia will point to the other one and say, well, who have they really played so far, right? Look, Georgia started out, they had games against UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, but we will, be fair here. They have had respectable teams on their schedule, like South Carolina and Auburn, of course, the recent win over Kentucky that we just mentioned. But as far as the Michigan Wolverines go, they started with a light schedule too. They had games against East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and then before they started playing teams like Rutgers, Nebraska, and Minnesota. And of course, with Michigan, they can do so many different things. But you know what? Let's start with the defense. And because this is the thing that Georgia was known for the last 2 years when they were back-to-back national champions, just the most loaded defenses maybe that college football had ever seen. I mean, it more or less was a feeder system to the NFL, more specifically the Philadelphia Eagles, who keep drafting Georgia Bulldogs. But, the last several years, couple of years, Georgia's always been a top 3 rushing defense team, stopping the run. That's what they were known for, top 3. And right now, they're not even in the top 20. So they're not as elite. Even they're still good. Don't get me wrong. They're still good. They're just not as elite as they have been. I mean, they only give up 104 yards a game on the ground. That's still pretty good, but not as elite as they were. And side note, the line of scrimmage on the other side of the ball, they're rushing for a full yard less per rush than they did last year too. But I don't want to get caught in the weeds. Michigan, by comparison to Georgia, gives up 104 yards per game, gives up 91 yards rushing per game. But what I really want to focus on regarding Michigan is they have the number 1 scoring defense in the country. They give up fewer points than anybody. It was shocking that Minnesota even got to double figures again. Got 10 points on them. First team to get 10 points on them all season. But on the average, Michigan still gives up less than 7 points per game. And by the way, SEC fan and Georgia fan, Penn State and Ohio State are number 2 and number 3, respectively, in that category. Georgia comes in at a more modest 13 points per game. That's a full touchdown more than Michigan gives up. Even Rutgers comes in 13th in the country at 14.5 points per game. Basically, so Georgia, you're like Rutgers defensively. Not a knock on anybody, just an observation. That's what the numbers say. Offensively, Georgia does rank in the top 10 at 41 points per game and 500 yards per game. That's impressive. I'm not going to knock that. Michigan averages 37 points per game as compared to the 41 that Georgia scores, and 415 yards compared to Georgia's 500. So, it's funny how Michigan's first 4 games, they were like cookie cutter, weren't they? They were all like 33-6, every one of them. That was, the scores were in that range. I'll get more detailed in just a moment, but it was very methodical on how they would run their football games. In fact, it was a sports gambler's dream on one hand. Very predictable. They beat East Carolina 30-3. They beat UNLV 35-7. They beat Bowling Green 31-6. They beat Rutgers 31-7. All in that same points scored and points allowed were all very similar. Rutgers 31-7. Now 3 of those first 4 games, Jim Harbaugh wasn't even there, and maybe the assistants, they were playing it safe and conservative because nobody wanted to be the coach that messed up and ended up with a loss with Harbaugh being suspended. Some gamblers were even complaining, Michigan wins, but they never cover. I think they were 1-3-1 against the spread in those first few games this season. But the old saying is, good teams win, great teams cover the point spreads. But also of note, Michigan just did what it needed to do. And they asserted themselves, and they just won the football games. But now, with Harbaugh back on the sideline, they're getting better during the games, and they're getting even more powerful. Each week, getting closer and closer to perfection. I mentioned how 2 weeks ago against Nebraska, Michigan had 0 penalties in a conference game. 0. You know what they did last week against Minnesota? Won. So you're telling me back-to-back conference games, 1 penalty, 2 games. I don't ever remember anybody doing that. It's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I mentioned in yesterday's podcast that JJ McCarthy probably will not win the Heisman because he only plays about 3/4 a game. Michigan's doing so well, he sits out and the backups come in. And when he does play, they really don't need him to light it up. So at first glance, he kind of appears to be the ultimate game manager who doesn't make mistakes and wins football games. But, Jim Harbaugh says he's the generational quarterback. And when they ask him to, that guy can make any throw to anywhere on the field and put it right on the receiver's numbers in full stride, time after time. Very, very accurate. Penn State's Drew Aller and Ohio State's Kyle McCord are kind of trending in that direction as well. Throw a pretty ball. But back to Georgia, Stetson Bennett. He's long gone. Talk about game managers. Carson Beck is now the guy. And look, he's not bad at all. Completes 74% of his passes. He has thrown for 1,900 yards so far, 11 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in 5 games. JJ McCarthy, better completion rate, 78%. Phenomenal. A few less yards, 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, all in 1 game, by the way. Had a bad game. Kyle McCord, 8 touchdowns and 1 interception. Of course, Drew Aller, 9 touchdown passes, no interceptions. He's played 1 less game, but he does not turn the ball over. But back to Michigan for a moment, because that's really what we're talking about here. Remember the first month of the season, I said all the scores were like 33-6 in that neighborhood and went out. Well, 2 weeks ago, they cracked 40. Everybody was like, oh, okay, now they're on a roll. This past weekend, they cracked 50 points. Granted, they had 2 defensive touchdowns in that game too. But that leads me to my next point, why I think Michigan is the best team in the country. I think they're playing the best complementary football in the entire country. Offense, defense, special teams, coaching, it's all working for Michigan right now. They can play any style of football that is required by the opponent at any given time. They could go smash mouth. They could go finesse. They can use their speed, their muscle. They play smart. They can play hurry up tempo. They can slow it down in a 4-minute drill. They're so well coached. They can do literally everything on the football field. And here we are at midseason, and they're getting better and better. And by the way, their next game is against Indiana. So look for them to be 7-0 and 4-0 in the Big Ten. They got Michigan State, and they got Purdue to follow. 2 very winnable games. Their first real test will be November 11th. That's at Penn State. Can't wait for that football game. That is going to be a great game. Then they travel to a Maryland team that just suffered its first loss of the season against Ohio State. And then back to Ann Arbor for the big game against the Buckeyes. So that's where we're really going to know where they are. And we'll know how really good or really great the Wolverines are at that point. And look, along the way, let's talk about Georgia again. Georgia has a few landmines as well coming up on their schedule. They've got Vandy on Saturday. They should get the W there. Then Florida, but that's at the world's largest cocktail party. And even though they are way better than Florida, that game sometimes can be tough. Florida's not very good, but again, and Missouri coming up on Georgia's schedule as well. Then back-to-back ranked opponents with Ole Miss and at Tennessee before closing out versus a Georgia Tech team that just beat Miami this past weekend. So Georgia's got a few tough teams coming up as well. Just one slip up on any one of those by the Georgia Bulldogs, and the Michigan Wolverines will be ranked number 1, where I think they should be in the first place. And depending on who the slip up could be for Georgia, not only will Michigan pass them up, I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State passed them up too into the number 2 slot and drafted them up. Just like a NASCAR race car, just follow Michigan up to the top. That, of course, would set off a wonderful 1-2 Michigan-Ohio State later on at the end of the season. So they're great. The Big Ten is great. I think the Big Ten is better. Do I hear a Big Ten chant instead of SEC chant? Big Ten, maybe? I think so. Your comments are welcome about this. I know a lot of you are not going to agree with me on this. Some of you will. You can hit me up on Twitter at Talk Big Ten with the number 10. And you can also hit me up on comments here on YouTube as well. Now, have you noticed that the unbalanced quirks of the new Big Ten football schedule that just got released late last week, it just has a little bit of unbalanced parts to it, some quirks to it, if you will. I've had a couple of days to think about it. I want to share those thoughts with you about your favorite teams in about a minute as we continue right here on Locked On Big Ten. So, what is Prize Picks? Well, Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You don't have the pros or the sharks in there. And you pick more or less. You group players, maybe 2 to 6 players, some stats, and you guess more or less on the stats. For example, maybe you take Josh Jacobs, more than 60 yards, and Patrick Mahomes, more than 2 passing touchdowns. More or less. Very easy like that. And it's a lot of fun, and it's a blast. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. Plus, it's fun to impress your friends with all your sports knowledge, and it's fun to impress your friends by turning your picks into money. It's awesome. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. And I also want to tell you about Game Time. Game Time, this is great. You want to go to an event, sporting event, football, basketball, theater, comedy, doesn't matter. Get your tickets through Game Time. They've got a very easy app that you can download and use. Browse through it. Get your last-minute deals, flash deals, the zone deals they have. You can see there's a picture. There's a view of the seat, from the seat of what you are about to buy a ticket for. Game Time has deals right up to the start of the event. In fact, even after an hour. If you used to live in, I used to live in LA. Maybe you live in LA, you get to these events late. You can buy them then. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, zone deals. You pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% the difference. How about that? Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LockedOnCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and the redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You know, the Big Ten re-released its schedule at the end of last week, and it's a redo from the 2024-2025 football schedule that released back in June. And then 2 weeks later, they had the addition of Oregon and Washington, and it required a complete redo. Well, they finally did it, and they released it last week. And of course, we were going into the weekend where we wanted to preview all the games, and then we came out of the weekend talking about the big games. And this is really the first moment we've had a chance to really address the new schedule here on Locked On Big Ten. And instead of going into every schedule for all 18 teams, like we might do if this were the dog days of summer, for example, I have some thoughts that jump out at me on this. I've had a few days to ponder it. I want to share it with you as well. First of all, this is a 5-year schedule. Before they did a 2-year schedule, this is a 5-year schedule all the way through 2028. It's a pretty big undertaking by the Big Ten. And, you know, I also will have to wonder if this is a peek behind the curtain a little bit, and that the Big Ten's mindset is we're done expanding for now. This is it. This is 18. So let's go ahead and project out for the next 5 years on this thing. And, you know, teams like North Carolina or Clemson or Florida State, you know, they're stuck in the ACC with their grant of rights deal with ESPN. It's got 13 more years on it. Huge buyout clauses on there. They're kind of stuck. Maybe the Big Ten says, yeah, maybe we'd like to have those teams someday, but I don't think any school is going to bite off what they got to pay to get out of those deals and come over now. Maybe after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, the 13 years that they have left on their deal over there in the ACC will have a lot fewer, maybe under 10 years. Maybe they can do something about it and afford to buy themselves out of the contract and come to the Big Ten then. So maybe the Big Ten's just fine right now. However, I will tell you this. I still think something's going to happen next summer. So stay tuned for all that. And the college football landscape is changing so quickly. Whether you do a 5-year schedule, 1-year schedule, 2-year schedule, probably doesn't matter. So regarding this scheduling, in 2024, all but one of the 14 teams, Purdue, will travel to the West Coast at least once in 2024. Everybody but Purdue. The longest coast-to-coast road trip will have Rutgers traveling to Southern Cal for USC, 2,450 miles. The schedule is called the Flex and Protect 18, Roman numerals. Flex and Protect 18. And over 5 years, 18 schools will play everyone at least 2 times, home and away. I love that. I think that's fantastic. I look at kids that can play 5, 6 years in the SEC, and they never go to every stadium. There are kids that could play in the SEC, and they'll never play a game at Tuscaloosa. They will never play a game at Neyland Stadium in Tennessee. There's too many teams. They only play 8 conference games. By the way, the Big Ten is going to commit to 9 conference games to make this happen. And they are also going to remove the East and West divisions. I wondered with the expansion, and of course you can clearly see on a map, you can divide it right down the middle, East and West. Maybe they would consider bringing the divisions back, but no, they're not gonna. It's all going to be one big pile, 18 teams, and that's how it's going to go. So we got our answer on that. Now, there are 12 protected rivalries based on tradition, geography, and trophy games that are going to be intact no matter what. These teams will play every year. Here they are. Illinois, Northwestern. Of course, they're right there next to each other regionally. It makes sense. Illinois and Purdue. Indiana and Purdue playing for the old Oaken Bucket. Iowa and Minnesota. Iowa and Nebraska. Iowa and Wisconsin. Minnesota and Wisconsin. Maryland and Rutgers, they're out east together. They should play together every single year. Michigan State, in-state rivalry. Of course, Michigan and Ohio State protected to play every year as they should. Oregon and Washington and UCLA and USC will play every single year. Penn State is the only conference school without a protected rival. Feel left out. But then again, who would be their natural rival to play every single year? Iowa, for the record, has 3 on this list. Iowa's the most important school in the conference, man. They got to be on the list every single year with several teams. So anyway, those are some quick thoughts on the scheduling. And I also want to take this time right now while I have you to thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Big Ten your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe. Click that black button down below. Help us out and subscribe on YouTube. Share, follow, and like Locked On Big Ten. Share it with your friends. Tell your friends about us if they're Big Ten fans. And also don't forget on Fridays, our Locked On College Football Live kickoff show from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern. That is live on this channel and all the channels as well. Coming up, it is our Tuesday tweets. Let's see if your tweet, don't forget, hit me on Twitter at TalkBig10. Let's see if your tweets made the list. All that coming up in 1 minute right here on Locked On Big Ten. I want to tell you about the Jace case and Jace Medical. We have 5 life-saving antibiotics, and they're at your disposal for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jace case is fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, you may jump on with a quick call with a board-certified physician. Otherwise, you get it, and you get ongoing care from their physicians on any treatment-related questions. This is doctor-created and doctor-recommended. What is a Jace case? Here's one that was sent to my house right here. This is a little case. It's full of the antibiotics in there. You're good to go. So don't be caught unprepared. There are things that happen. There are emergencies. There are disasters, hurricanes, floods, pandemics where supply chains are cut off. You don't have to be unprepared like that. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. So it's very easy. The Jace case is simple. Just go online, fill out the form, then you get the prescription life-saving medications right to your door. The Jace case gives you peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in emergency. Jace case makes sure that you have the medication in hand. Okay. You can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using my code Locked On. That's Locked On at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. All right, now it is time for Tuesday tweets, something we like to do. Let's see if your tweet made it on here as well. I'm going to put these on screen right here, full screen, and check it out. And let's see here. Now, I know this one's a lot of words. This is from Bill Conley from ESPN. It talks about JJ McCarthy. He posted an article on it as well. It says, look, he's first in total QBR, averaging 9.9 yards per dropback, 9.1 yards per carry. Basically saying if he would play 4 quarters instead of 3 quarters, because Michigan's always in the lead and resting him the rest of the way, that he clearly would be the Heisman favorite. And he's not wrong about that. Here's from Mr. Ohio. If you compare similar opponents for Kyle McCord and C.J. Stroud, who is the Buckeyes quarterback last year, now in the NFL, against similar opponents, IU, Notre Dame, and Maryland, McCord has 799 yards passing against those 3. C.J. Stroud had 761. Interesting little nugget. Here's from Zach Seiko from Lockdown Penn State. Very good podcast, by the way. We're going to have him on the program. It's a screenshot of Notre Dame losing to Louisville at the end, 33-20. Shout out to all the people that tried to tell me Notre Dame and LSU would make it to the college football playoff over Penn State. Again, he's not wrong about that at all. Badger Steve checking in. Can we get an injury update on the sideline photographer at the Badgers-Rutgers game this weekend? Thinking of you, dude. Yeah, in case you missed it, it was an incomplete pass to the left side. Took one bounce and then bounced right in. You see this guy here in the red doubled over off on the sideline. Yeah, hit him right in the nether legions at a pretty high rate of speed. He went down for the count. Here is at Michigan football at UMGO blog about Donovan Edwards passing Chris Perry in receiving yards by Michigan running back. Will he make it to the top spot where Anthony Thomas is? Possibly, very possibly. Very dynamic running back. Here is an OSU fan retweeting Kyle McCord at his post-game press conference. Kyle McCord, by the way, against Maryland, started off 2 for 7, finished the game 19 of 29 with 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kyle McCord saying, look, the offense is at its best when we have both going, running and passing. Most are. He's right. And he did really get it going there in the second half. Here is one from at Hawkeye Football. This is a video. If you go to it early in the game against Purdue, Caleb Johnson, 67 yards for the breakaway. What an amazing run he had there. This is Luke Fickell, little locker room chit-chat video for you Wisconsin fans. If you want to check it out at Badger Football. Pretty good little speech, about a minute and a half there. Here's also at ESPN Madison, Luke Fickell on Ricardo Hallman's pick six. There's a video of the pick six. And he said, look, that's as big a play as we've had all year. Did it with 4 seconds to go in the first half. It was amazing. In fact, it made our Big Ten top 10 on yesterday's podcast. Let's see. At Deep Waters, this is a billboard shot of a Michigan State uniform. The number 2, Meyer, squeezed in between Urban to MSU. Yeah, a lot of chit-chat about Urban Meyer to Michigan State. Spent a lot of time talking about that last week. Speaking of Urban Meyer, here's a screenshot of him with Maryland beating Ohio State 10-7, looking very stern on the sideline, watching his former team and the program that he built, trailing Maryland. And it says Urban thinking about coming out of retirement. And after Michigan's first of 2 pick sixes, the defense posed for a photo on the sideline. You can see this is 12 seconds into the game. 7-0. Look at that in the lower left-hand corner. Jim Harbaugh taking a moment out of coaching to go ahead and pose with his guys. I thought that was a pretty cool moment as well. So there you have it. That is a look at the Tuesday tweets for this week. And always enjoy having those up and about and sharing those with you. Had a few more there today. So, hey, tweet me at Talk Big Ten. Amuse me, and I will put it on this podcast and make you a star. All right. Many ways for you to interact with me, of course. On Twitter at Talk Big Ten, as I said. Also, our website, talkbig10.com. That's the number 10, talkbig10.com. Be sure to subscribe. Please help me out with that black subscribe button on the bottom. It's free. It's easy. You just click it and forget it. You're good to go. And follow this podcast right now on your favorite podcast app, and you get the latest episode of Locked On Big Ten as soon as it becomes available each and every day. And, of course, I invite you to check out Locked On Sports Today, their podcast for the latest on everything going on in sports. In the meantime, have a great day. Once again, thank you for checking us out. Can't wait to talk to you again next time. I'm Craig Sheeman for Locked On Big Ten.